Now, this is what Max is saying. We're losing time here, and now they're in for the undercut situation, aren't they? Ferrari puts on new tyres, and Red Bull, this is where Max needs to be pumping in his best stuff.
For the second year running, here at Zandvoort, Max Verstappen wins the Dutch Grand Prix!
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Undercut Podcast. We are back again, and this time it is to review the Dutch Grand Prix, and it's an OG episode this time around because it is just myself and Jesse Billington here this evening. By the time of recording, might not be evening when you listen to it, but that's just how we roll here on this podcast. So before I ramble off into obscurity, how are you, Jesse?
I'm not too bad. Busy day at work, but otherwise all good. Been watching the 1987 Misano MotoGP 500cc highlights with Dad because about 35 years ago to the day he was there watching it. And then obviously this weekend I'm also off to Italy to watch some motorsport. So it's funny how it goes round in circles, life.
Keeping it in the family, very much as close to on brand. If we just had that for the preview episode, that would have been perfect. Maybe we'll add around that later.
We can put it back in for the preview episode, but also it works nicely because this is around the era that Mick Doohan's dad was racing 500cc motorcycles, and Mick is currently doing Formula 2, which is racing both the weekend previously to this, which was the Dutch Grand Prix, which we're about to review, and the weekend coming up in an episode that you're bound to listen to after this, which is the Monza preview episode, where Formula 2 is also going to be. Anyway,
we'll do like a rough playlist on the YouTube channel where it's just like Italy related, and you just have to piece it together yourself.
There will be a way of stringing this together. If not, pay no attention to that, and we'll shuffle quickly on to what the hell has happened with the Dutch Grand Prix.
Which this week is starting off with, I mean, we could have predicted this was going to be a topic of conversation, the flares, which proved to be a big issue during qualifying and proved to annoy people both on and off track and people watching from large distances away, either America and Australia, because they all had to deal with the Sky coverage of it, and you had to put it with Crofty and all of this kind of weird headmaster or attempted headmaster bashing of everyone and trying to be like the world's policeman, and it didn't really come across that great. I know the message was one of, like, it was meant to be a good message, but it just it didn't really land, I don't think. Definitely not for the international audiences. It was a bit cringy for me. So, I mean, I know that's not the issue here, but what did you think?
The flares themselves were a problem, especially when, for whatever reason, Dutch fans started lobbing them onto the circuit in an attempt to hinder Max Verstappen. I don't get that. That makes no sense to me. I can't understand why you'd do that, especially in an active session. After the race, yeah, once the cool-down laps happen, sure, why not make everything orange? Who gives a turkeys? But when there's an active race session on,
just stupid.
Yeah, don't do it. That's not fun.
So it's bad enough during the opening lap in Austria when you couldn't see parts of the track when you were the driver, but even then it was interesting. I found stuff. I've mentioned it, I'll bring it back down there. It's only now that he suddenly decides, oh yes, this is a terrible thing and we should really poo-poo all over it, but come Austria and a few of the other races we've had where there's been a lot of flare action, not so much as a peep out of him or anyone else on that matter, so it's interesting to see when it suddenly becomes an issue and how dead against it you always were, but you never mentioned it before, and this is the first time we're ever hearing of it, despite this not being a new issue. It just frustrates me in things again. Jensen had the right idea, he mentioned it in commentary and was like, yeah, it's bad, they stink, and not necessary, and that, you didn't need to say anything else there, because again, it's just like, don't be a dick. End of story. You don't really need to keep harping on about it, and then just, again, making out like you're suddenly everyone's weird dad.
I think this is far more of an annoying Croftyism than it is anything else when it comes to the commentary and the coverage of the flare problem. The flares themselves, problem in the whole, don't do it, don't be stupid, that's easy enough.
But again, that's all you need to say there.
Yeah.
Everyone's pretty much clever enough to understand that without you going like all, I forget the word now, not patriotic.
Didactic, something along those lines.
Patronising. Patronising, that's the word. Yeah, it came across very much that.
But then I would have, perhaps cut to a shot of the entry gates where they have the sign saying no road flares or no smoke flares or whatever it is, bag checks in progress for yada yada yada. Show it, tell it, leave it alone. But Crofty seems to have this really annoying thing he does with his commentary where he'll pick up on a point and then won't drop it. Everyone else, mention it while it's funny, while it's relevant, use it, great, move on. and this is potentially it's something we're seeing more and more of with Crofty's commentary, is inability to find the next thing to start talking about. And it's sort of
You never seem to have that problem with Brundle, either Brundle, Jakes, or amusingly Jensen Button, who is quite new to the whole commentary thing, but seems quite a natural at it.
Button
and just kind of flows, lets it dip down when there's not much to say. He won't say anything, or just make a little comment, or go into the driver's perspective. He won't just keep doing a Nico Rosberg and telling you how many times he used to fight Lewis Hamilton, and to the point that, oh, did you race Lewis Hamilton? Well, I never knew that.
Yeah, but all crucially, Ted Kravitz, who is a goldmine of actual commentary. Bear in mind, he used to do like the TV direction and the editing and producing of it when it was ITV back in when it was Murray Walker and the ITV days.
Yeah.
Ted's been around Formula One as a pundit, as a producer, as a sports commentator, as someone who puts together a TV package for far longer than many people realise. And it's annoying to see Sky only really give him just a little bit here and there, and occasionally his notebook. Perhaps that's all he wants, and in which case, fair enough. But if he were to be given that bigger position, if they were to boot Crofty out tomorrow, as much as I'd like to see...
Kravitz and Brundle would be a heck of a team of commentary.
Yeah. It would be that... Yeah, I think it would be almost that sort of Murray Walker, James Hunt style. Yeah.
Excitement for the race that never seems to go away, and that would just be Ted immediately, and it seems to have been something that Crofty's lost a bit over the last years in particular, and it's a shame because I can't really remember when he first started because it seems so long ago now, but he just doesn't seem to have that same kind of enthusiasm for it, and just seems to be there for a job, and seems to just be across as this is his thing and no one can go onto it. He kind of, even with Ted a couple of times, it came across as a bit, you probably don't mean anything bad by it, but it just seems a bit of a dick.
There were points where Ted almost seemed to get kind of snippy with David Croft, and...
Which Ted doesn't do that.
No.
You have to have done something really quite bad to annoy Ted.
Yeah, so, I don't know, perhaps it's something that Sky needs to look at changing with their ongoing coverage, because they seem to have a billion-year contract with Formula One to do it, so... Anyway, that's a rather moot point with regards to the rest of the race, the whole commentary thing, that's more...
But yes, basically, underlying message. Flair's bad, don't do it until after the race, do what the Italians do and just have a giant flag instead.
Yeah. I'm going to be there. I want to find someone with a big flag and wave the big flag after the
You're going to take a big flag. You're going to make one between now and the weekend.
I'm flying on Thursday evening. I don't have a lot of time and I'm in the office tomorrow and Wednesday, so...
Well, that's not my problem, so you've got to get onto that.
We're not sure what flag to take either. Do we take an Italian flag and hope that it's a Ferrari
take a Ferrari
win?
Flag. And just
a Ferrari flag?
You'll blend in at least, regardless of what happens. And you can hide underneath it when it all goes terribly, terribly wrong.
Yeah, true. Use it to hide our shame. But anyway, that's a moot point. We'll get on to talking about Italy in the next episode. We'll stick with Zandvoort's and Max Verstappen's 4th pole position of the season, which doesn't seem like a lot, given how dominant he's been.
Just kind of annoyingly revert back to what we were just talking about with regards to Italy and Ferrari, and just showing that it's only his 4th pole position, and yet he's leading the championship by about 1 billion points.
Yeah,
just showing that he doesn't need to be on pole to win and dominate. He's just doing it for fun now.
Yeah, I think that you make the point there. He doesn't need to be on pole to dominate. This man can race other drivers and still go on to dominate a race. He can start from off pole position, as we've seen with Hungary and Spa back to back, coming from down in the depths of the field to win the race or score big points. He can do that. And again, that's one of the things that you see from the GOATs, the all-time legends, the guys that go on to accrue world championships, is their ability to fight through. And yeah, great to see him have a 4th pole position of the season. Amazing that he's done so much with only 4 pole positions. Bit odd that Perez...
He's done a lot with the other 7 pole positions that Charles has, though, so maybe we're balancing it out slightly.
Yeah, he does have the strange record, or Charles has the strange record of Max having more wins from Charles poles than vice versa. But anyway, yeah, Perez had an interesting strategy move to ensure that Max Verstappen podium.
So everyone's giving Yuki and his strategists grief over the race, but everyone seems to forget about Perez on Saturday, dropping it on most unlikely of corners to be able to drop it on.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, time to doff your tinfoil caps, because it's going to be one of those episodes where we have to discuss some interesting issues that have been brought up by people that don't
have nothing better to do.
Yeah, don't particularly watch a lot of Formula One and just see one thing happen and go, well, that's impossible, and then everyone goes, no, it's probably just Perez.
Well,
dropping it.
I had heard it wasn't Perez in that car; it was actually Latifi, but they managed to swap it out before you could notice. So
Well, actually, I heard it was Bruno Senna.
that would make a lot more sense. There's a lot said about Bruno. He's sneaky like that.
That's a niche reference.
If you're listening to Bruno, then we're onto you.
That is a niche reference and something that we'll likely mention again with Crashgate. But anyway, yeah, Max Verstappen pole position, Perez somehow dropping it on the banking. I think it possibly just error. The track was being a bit of a nightmare to drive around, quite sandy, despite however
we saw
many
what
feeder series
happened to
going
Daniel
around it.
Ricciardo with the dirt on the track and how much that buggered up his lap. So if there was something there related to a similar part of the track, if there's something a little bit later on, maybe a little bit more dirt or dust or whatever that was there that was in the wrong place that hadn't been there in previous laps, then you don't need much. I mean, you see, what was it, Lance Stroll in Mugello in 2020, it didn't seem to be an awful lot there. It was just the smallest of things and off into the barriers you go. So
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't take much.
not long after that turn in Formula 2 in the, was it feature or sprint race, we saw that big
Feature.
pile-up where, again, possibly
Which is also Mugello-esque.
Mugello-esque again, but also partly due to the front of the grid backing everyone up, but also drivers trying to set off on what was likely a sandy and loose surface all of a sudden with a bit of sand accumulation under the safety car. Track condition very fast deteriorates in Zandvoort as much as it improves, and it wouldn't have taken a lot for a car to become upset. So as much as it's easy and fun to poke fun at Perez for dropping it and securing Max that pole position, it's quite easily explained. As are another point we'll get to, we'll touch on Ferrari quickly, who seem to be fighting their inner demons to do something, and according to the notes, not all weekend long. A lot of pit lane chaos from them that would in the end hamper Sainz. I think this was a note from you, Thiemo.
I was about to accuse you of that because I don't remember writing that.
In that case, it is from the missing third member of the podcast. It does sound like very much an Ellie-May piece, to be fair.
She got a race ban, by the way, listeners, for being mean last week. So she's not here for these 2 episodes. So she's going to sit in the naughty corner and learn that things have consequences.
Yeah, we've got Roberto
Back to
Neri in her
Ferrari
place. Yes, but yeah, Ferrari, they had a tumultuous weekend, I think is the fairest way to put it. There were glimmers of good.
I mean, you could describe it with comparison to other races they've had this season as not shit, but at the same time, there were definitely questionable elements to it, such as the pit stop, such as the inevitable strategy as always, and offering Leclerc fourth when he's in second, and hoping he's going to be happy with it, and somehow Charles not saying in public at least yet that the championship is over. And it's tricky. It's like, yeah, it's tricky. It's nigh on near mathematical impossibility if things keep going as they are. Carlos Sainz seems to have realised that Ferrari are making mistakes and maybe we should learn from this, but nothing is actually happening, and Mattia Binotto even saying after the race that he's not concerned about the strategy. He's not concerned about the pit stop with Sainz. He thinks everything is like it's just one of those things. It's like, yes, it may be one of those things, but when it's the basics, like not having all 4 tyres for their car, like that's not a new thing. It's not been 3-wheelers like Robin reliant F1 cars as much as that's been an amusing thing to watch anytime soon. Like that's not a new thing. They've always needed 4 tyres, maybe even 6, but we're still not. Even then, you still don't have enough tyres with 3.
Yeah, you're going to go on a very lopsided
your
Tyrrell
Ferrari,
P34
you've
there.
been there since the beginning. You know that you're going to need quick calls between when the car is calling for the pit and the people in the garage being ready to put those tyres on. And I don't really know what the excuse is there. Like you don't just forget.
Well, in the early practice sessions, I think usually FP1 or at least by FP2, you want it down pat. You do essentially pit stop runs. Usually in FP1, FP2, you reserve for your race prep, your longer running, where you're not doing as many pit stops. FP1, where you're in and out of the pits a lot more, what you do is you basically say box, and then start a stopwatch and see roughly how long it takes from the point you say box for your driver to arrive in his pit box. And then you reverse engineer essentially how long it's going to take. You know how long it's going to take for your pit engineers to run with tyres to their allocated standing spots ready, and you match up exactly how late around the circuit you can say box to a driver and they appear in the box with everything in place. And Ferrari must have done that and then either been surprised by Sainz's pace coming in or just fumbled at getting it ready, in which case they didn't play it cautious enough with where they set their their sort of pit limiter, as in to say,
again,
this is the latest
you
point.
kind of expect of Rich Energy Racing from one team rather than Ferrari.
Yeah, you expect this from a new team, and Ferrari do have a relatively new group of people in their pit crews. They've sort of refreshed their lineup behind the scenes a bit, and this is one of the
wonders.
It's working wonders because was it Nico Rosberg that levelled at them that said this is a sort of Formula 2, Formula 3
You're saying
level.
that the Formula 2 and Formula 3 do better pit stops than Ferrari.
Better pit stops and strategy, yeah, and he's not wrong. He's not wrong. I don't.
It's a weird time to be alive in F1 where you're agreeing with Nico Rosberg on things like this.
Yeah.
Just...
But Ferrari did make rookie errors with that, and again, it's one of the things that they should know how to do it. It's a regular part of setting up for a race weekend, yet for some reason this weekend they got that wrong, and they paid dividends for it, and then Sergio Perez ran over one of their wheel guns and sort of fully bunny hopped his car going over this wheel gun, which says a lot for how stiff the cars are set up, but also...
It was quite a bounce though if you watch that in slow motion.
It was quite a bounce, and
really...
Perez is... Because it's also a narrow pit lane, Perez is lucky he didn't bounce and clip essentially the...
So it's a very narrow pit lane.
Yeah, he's lucky he didn't clip essentially the control walls and basically wipe himself out or break a front wing, because then he couldn't go back into his pit box. He'd have to drive out of the pits, round a lap, and then come back in again to repair whatever damage he does crashing into a Ferrari wheel gun.
Which amusingly would have kind of been a mirror image of Yuki Tsunoda a few laps later.
Yes, which does lead neatly on to our next point, actually. Yuki and the mystery of the loose wheel, as I think I titled this point. In the end, it was a differential failure that saw him retire. But, so I've had to do a lot of reading, a lot of digging on this, a lot of listening back to radios and watching footage back. So, Yuki comes out of his pit stop, feels something isn't right, and a differential keeps the rear end of the car nice and tight, keeps everything pulled together. Chances are it wasn't the differential that was going, it would have been like a C-ring that's holding the axle shafts in the back of the car. But if one of those fails and starts pulling on the differential, that will feel like a wheel is coming loose, because essentially you've got a wheel moving away from the car in a direction it's not supposed to be moving. He would have said, wheel not fitted, which is a major problem on a Formula 1 circuit if you feel that you have to stop. We saw that with Romain Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen in Australia 2018-19. It was 2019 because it was the Haas era, and... you immediately have to stop at the side of the road, and the team would have looked back at the data from their wheel guns. They feed back data so you can see the tightening, and they would have said, no, all of them tighten fine. But the problem is, at this point, Yuki thought, I'm done. I can't drive any further on the circuit with a loose wheel. That is unsafe. Someone gets fined, we lose points. Don't want to do that. So he would have unloosened his belts and gone to get out the car, but just as he's doing that, the team goes, wheels are fine, box, we'll do the wheels again. So he then has to do a Charles Leclerc Barcelona 2020 and drive half a lap of the track with his belts partially undone back to his pit box, where they then put on the same compound of tyres, but again, just to make sure there's no problems and make sure they're all tight. And then his engineers tighten up his belts and they think, okay, problem solved, and send him out again. On his way out, he's like, no problem, still there. By this point, they're like, okay, it's not wheels. They then likely notice something else come up on the data as differential, rear axle problem, something along those lines. There's either a drop in pressure, there's a drop in traction, power's moving weirdly across the diff, because you can adjust your diff locking on your steering wheel. So they obviously have sensors and feedback from that section of the car. They will then notice errant feedback coming from it and go, no, something mechanical's wrong, park it up, get out, your race is done. So that's why it's weird that he came in, obviously didn't cause a safety car the first time round, so they brought him in and then waited an ideal amount of time to send him out again and say, do it again and do it properly, we need a safety car. Which, it's obvious, easy to jump to that conclusion, but when you start pulling it apart and add in the actual facts of what happened and the mechanics of why you would miss one problem and mistake it for another, there's the answer.
I do find, the one bit I do find most interesting, or two bits actually, was when you were watching back the original pit stop. Again, you've got to really slow it down to see it, but the front left that he was saying was where the issue was. it doesn't look like the wheel gun actually does touch the tyre, which I'm sure it must have done because of the issue being the differential, but it was done so quickly you barely see it, so that it could be very easy to see that maybe they just somehow forgot that. I mean, we saw a lot of random stuff with pit stops this year, especially this race, so it wasn't too conceivable. And
well, especially this weekend.
Really focus, yeah,
Formula
really
2.
focus to spot it there. And then the seatbelts, like you say, it's interesting that nothing more has come from that from the stewards and the FIA, because it seemed to me and a lot of others that he had started undoing them to get out of the car because he thought he was going to just finish the race there, and then they obviously tightened them back up when he came back in, and then denied profusely afterwards that he'd actually loosened them. It was like, oh no, they just came apart themselves, which, A, you're lying, and you should be reprimanded a little bit for that because dangerous, or B, they came loose by themselves, dangerous.
Yeah.
And you need to investigate that thoroughly, because that's a weird thing to suddenly happen when it's not happened at all this season, as far as I'm aware. So either way is not good there, and Yuki's poker face isn't quite there yet. You could tell quite clearly in the 2 interviews that I saw with him when he was asked about that he was kind of like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, I mean, in an interview with Claire Cottingham after the race, he said, cautiously driving back to the pit lanes after being told to fire up his car, I was like drifting on the straight. He said I was doing counter steering along the straight, so that's why it didn't feel like it's normal. And to be counter steering at that point, that implies it's your back end that's going, and obviously they would have got in and said, yeah, no, it would have proved that there wasn't the wheels that were loose, it was a genuine mechanical failure. It's just unfortunate that the way it manifested itself and the way it was diagnosed saw this weird sort of 2-stop strategy or 2-failure strategy that looked like it could have been manufactured by what's her face, the Red Bull strategist Hannah Schmitz, who is receiving a hell of a lot of flack online for this, and unfairly so. She has proven a weapons grade strategist this season for Red Bull. Everything
so she
other
got
teams...
Perez to win a race. I mean, that needs quality strategy.
Yeah,
because
yes.
he doesn't seem capable to do it by himself this year.
No, and equally there's been just other elements where the Red Bull team have seemed in a world of their own. And again, it comes down to this sort of absolutely brilliant car and brilliant design from Adrian Newey, brilliant drive from Max Verstappen, but there is a third element to it. The holy trinity that makes it up is, this fantastic strategy that she's coming up with. And it seems that as soon as everyone jumped on this sort of Yuki Tsunoda, not necessarily crash gate, but retirement gate hype train, they immediately thought this was sort of the creation from the devil herself, Hannah Schmitz. And it's annoying to see people so willing to throw someone under the bus, especially at a time when we're actively trying to encourage women into motorsport, into roles, obviously driving roles, great, but also getting women into roles outside of the driving seat, into sort of your strategist roles, your team principal roles. It's doing a hell of a good job at reversing that good effort that things like W Series and Extreme E are doing to try and get women into these positions. And it's
make me think
just
though,
annoying.
For this podcast, we should really invest in a bullshit button so that we can press any time we need to call it out, and we won't even believe that it's just bullshit, because you know that when we say it's something serious, that it's absolute bullshit.
Yeah, the same. It would have been quite useful when it was the Yuri Vips thing, and I think it falls into that same category again. It's like, we don't want to have to discuss this, but it warrants discussion because it's unacceptable. It's not good. It's not fun. I don't want to see it happen in my sport. She's brilliant at her job. Leave her alone. She had obviously had nothing to do with it's not a Red Bull team. It's not a Red Bull junior team. AlphaTauri is a direct competitor of Red Bull. They just so happen to use Red Bull powertrains in the same way that Haas uses Ferrari powertrains. They are owned by the same overall company, which is Red Bull Drinks.
I was just going to say, direct competitor implies they have a chance of competing with Red Bull when they really don't, let's face it. They can't even compete with the midfield.
Yeah, but it's the same way that Haas is a direct competitor of Ferrari, but they're a customer of the engines.
Yeah.
Broad strokes in the way that it's
competing with Usain Bolt in a running race, yes.
Yes.
We're all competitors equally.
Yeah. But the fact is, she would have had nothing to do with the AlphaTauri strategy. Occasionally, you do get sort of teams joke about afterwards, like convenient things happening, and sort of one team principal jokingly buying flowers or a case of beer for another team. That's happened previously, but usually in hindsight, and it's clearly done in jest. It does not happen, especially since the fallout of Crashgate, where a team goes, we need you to retire one of your drivers on the circuit in a location that's going to cause a safety car. Because in a world where now pit radios are broadcast, you can't get away with that.
I will just say that Singapore's coming out.
Yeah. Don't even put that idea out on the internet.
And Alonso's deal with Renault. Bye, Ocon. You'll retire. If he retires, calling it now. We're gonna
Are you gonna go change your predictions for Singapore?
I think so.
Yeah, Crashgate 2.0 or 3.0. I can't remember how many versions of Crashgate we've had so far.
It's the most direct sequel because it's the same team with the same driver.
Yeah, that is.
If Flavio's a guest, that's going to be even better for me.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on from Yuki Tsunoda and the mystery of the loose wheel to possible tension between the team moving forwards with Lewis Hamilton. Although this has since been cleared up. I think I wrote this
I
not
think
long
this
after
is
the race.
clickbait at best, to be honest, because it's like Alonso last week. You say stuff in the heat of the moment, and it's fair enough, because let's face it, if we were in their places, we'd be saying a lot worse.
Oh, I would have called nearly every person in that pit crew the worst words imaginable, and I would have immediately apologised when I got out of the car. And again, Toto Wolff said, yeah, fair enough, we didn't make the right calls, and in the heat of the moment you say stuff, but at the end of it, also Hamilton was magnanimous about it. He came out,
but
apologised.
at the same time, I think that it was still the best result they were going to get, because Red Bull did their pit kind of perfectly. They didn't need to, but they saw the opportunity. Annoyingly, a little bit like in Abu Dhabi last year, it did sniff a little bit like that, and so close to the end. Not as close, admittedly, but it did sniff a bit of that. But the most interesting bit for me, I thought, was that if that had been Bottas in that car and this race, and it had been a few, and like last year or any period, and he'd come on the team radio and said, I'd like to change for the softs, I think the team would have said no. Whereas George, it's like, yeah, all right.
Yeah, I think with George they were a bit more forgiving. Potentially they didn't anticipate him doing what he did.
Bottas in his first year maybe would have been interesting to see, because George definitely, he's outperforming Lewis at the moment in the races at least. Which granted there's a little bit of luck on his side there, but again it's still very impressive the record he's managed to have there. And he's only 13 points off second place in the championship, so it's not inconceivable he gets that. So again, maybe it's worth taking the risk there to see what we can get. And I think as much as it would vex Lewis if George was the one that got Mercedes win first for them, especially this year, he would get over that pretty quickly because he is such a team player. And again, after the race finished, and he's saying about on the radio to Toto that we need to have a discussion about it. He then switched immediately into professionalism mode and was thanking the mechanics and the racing engineers and all the rest of it for doing such a fantastic job all weekend. And it's like, he may be still quite peeved about it all, but he is not going to just let that rip for everyone to hear. He's professional enough to not let that happen.
Yeah, and it's easy to make, like you said, the sort of clickbaity piece of tension between Lewis and the team, but afterwards, Lewis is a professional.
Cue this being the title for our episode this week.
Yeah, this will be dropped early on, so people go, ooh, listen to this. Lewis is a professional. He is a seasoned race driver. That is a team he is well bedded with, and obviously has a lot of close colleagues in it. He's not going to sort of just leave things to simmer away and sour. He's better than that, and as much as I'm not his biggest fan on the track, because I'm just great driver, but I can appreciate the professionalism of him, and I'm always in awe. This is one of the things is always trying to explain the fact that I'm not a Lewis Hamilton fan, and then having to try and justify it.
I think it's like me with Max. I can respect him enough as a driver and what he's capable of, but I'm personally just not the biggest fan of him. But I've got nothing against the guy personally.
Yeah, I think that's what I said.
You're just not my cup of tea.
Yeah, especially also I'm a huge fan of what Lewis does outside of racing as well. I cannot fault him, but he's a brilliant human being. But when it comes to Formula 1, he's just not my favourite. I think that it just sounds harsh, and it always, especially when it hits the internet. It's because
these days not allowed a personal opinion.
I think that's it. I spend too much time on Formula 1 on Twitter that I'm sort of so shy of having a personal opinion that someone's going to absolutely cancel me for not liking Lewis Hamilton. Anyway.
Talking of people who got cancelled,
or at least
Bottas' engine cancelled him yet again this week.
That's
during the race.
That works as a link. Third DNF in a row for Bottas.
I was having a look back through some of the drivers to see if I wanted to rejig my fancy team, and looking at Bottas for an option because I was thinking Bottas or Joe, and I was like, you know what? I'm not liking Bottas' track record at the moment. He had a good start to the season and it's scored a lot of points, but the only reason he's still in 10th, I think, in the championship is because he did so well early on. But 3 DNFs in a row now, which, okay, last week was because of Latifi, but at the same time, it's an engine issue, bit of a punt, and again, maybe it wouldn't have made it the whole way through. Maybe if it would have been a race earlier, it would have tucked it out in Spa instead of here. So, not great for Valtteri, and you've got to feel a little bit sorry for him because again they had that Q3 record of getting into Q3 or getting out of Q1 at least every race from his start of his F1 career with Williams until Hungary, and then 2 races back to back he gets knocked out in Q1.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at my F1 fantasy team. He scored me -9 this week for my BRT Yamaha team, and I'm now thinking, do I swap him for someone? Yeah. Not a brilliant streak for him, and some problems that have been brewing away. But yeah, it's just unfortunate for him. It doesn't make him a winner, nor does it make him a spinner. But speaking of said topic, it's time for our winners and spinners. And despite the fact that she is not here, she has submitted her winners and spinners Ellie-May has put forward to my dears, although she's not actually given us any sort of justification for them, so we can, to an extent.
We can do that accordingly.
We can rib
she's
her
happy enough with it.
and pull them apart, and she won't know until it goes live. We'll start with Thiemo. We'll start with your good self. Your winner, please.
Yeah, I mean, multiple reasons for this Max Verstappen. I just, again, after FP1 and the gearbox issue, it was not looking ideal for him, and he probably had to fight for, I feel like, the Dutch Grand Prix victory more than he or any of us watching at all thought he would have to. Especially amusing as he started from pole, and we think if he would have been 14th or 10th, maybe it would have been easy for him. We just don't understand yet. But yeah, pole position, 4th, as we said earlier, then gets the race win and the fastest lap, and extends that championship lead by even more points. It's ridiculous, and on a personal level, he helped me a lot in my fantasy team and in my predictions for this podcast. So, triple win for me on that one. So, big tick.
You did have him as your mega driver, so you did earn triple points off of him for fantasy.
I did, and this was I thought Zandvoort would be the place to do it, and lo and behold, I was right.
It was a good play, I'll give you that. My winner for this weekend has to go to George Russell. Second place, not terrible at all, really. Good performance
First
from him.
time he got second this year.
First time he's got second this year. It's just a decent performance from him. And again, sort of outperforming what we're expecting of that Mercedes. And again, when it comes to having the racing now, so watching what's going on around him, calling for that pit stop to get those softs to go to the end on, there's a good little racing driver there, and it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of continues to develop through this season. And when we get a good Mercedes under him, he's really going to be a big threat to, I'm not even going to say like Charles Leclerc, but certainly to Max Verstappen. I think they're beyond Charles Leclerc.
So he's already meeting Charles Leclerc. So.
Yeah, that's my thing. I think he's going to be beyond a threat for Charles Leclerc. He is going to be dabbling with Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton when there's a good car, and it's going to be interesting.
I think it's also a reflection of Mercedes this year in that they know they're not winning, and they said, and granted it didn't go great for them in Spa, but, well, it did kind of, but with George there as well, but in the sense that they were saying, yeah, we're just here to cause chaos now, and they really are. They're not taking their foot off the gas, but they're kind of just doing their own thing, and they're not really, their plan is just, let's do the best we can and bugger everyone else as much as we can do, because Alpine and McLaren can't touch us in 4th, they can't steal 3rd from us. We can go and get Ferrari, and they're helping us to do that. We might not get 1st, barring some kind of miracle, but 2nd is still not bad when you think of where they started off at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, so there's certainly a lot of hope left on the table for Mercedes. Move on to Ellie-May's predictions, and not predictions, her winners at least, and she's given us Max Verstappen and Hannah Schmitz. Both points we've actually touched on already. Obviously, Max is pretty dominant driving again. Another brilliant weekend of strategy and sort of reacting to things as the circuit changes from Hannah Schmitz. So, yeah, sort of top tier choices. I don't think we can't really pick those apart, to be fair. Might have better luck with her spinners, although Thiemo, we'll go back to you for a spinner first.
Yeah, for me, I've got 2. I mean, first up, Daniel Ricciardo, but I feel like I want to put more emphasis on McLaren than Ricciardo there, because qualifying, I think it was Vettel that buggered him up there with the dirt at the end of Q1, which we saw how tight Q1 was on time, so I think the top 20 all within a second of each other, so honestly, I think this could have been a really good weekend for Ricciardo, and there was some unfortunate stuff there which could have been made up in the race. And you would have thought, starting as far back as, what was it, 17th, 18th, that McLaren would have the sense to just throw the textbook out slightly and just go for some wild strategy, because you've got about as good a chance at working as anything at that point, and you've got nothing to lose. Instead, they pitted him early to go onto the hards, and then pitted him surprisingly soon after that to go into another set of the hards, if I'm not mistaken. And then with all the chaos and everything, it just, couldn't do anything. And you think, even with the dog shit of a car that McLaren is, especially for him, he should have been further ahead and should have been able to overtake a good few people. But instead, just was absolutely nowhere, and you just have to think, again, if we get the tinfoil hats out, as McLaren just decided, we're just not going to bother helping Ricciardo for the season now, we're fully focused on Oscar for next year, and we don't care anymore.
But surely there's so much they could be getting from Daniel in terms of car development and moving it forwards. He's not...
Logically, yes, but not everyone has that.
I don't know, potentially this might be their way of putting him on gardening leave. If anything, they've bought him out of his contract. They don't want to let him know into too much.
Yeah, but still, you need to fight Alpine for fourth. You'd think at least give him a good strategy in the race. Even if you lock him out of the sim and you lock him out of the strategy using to having with Lando for other developments of the car, you'd still think that you would try one or two things for the race itself. Mick Schumacher, by contrast, had kind of the opposite race. He had brilliant qualifying, P8, getting to Q3, which was excellent, but then just got hunkered down in traffic straight away on lap 1, and then was just tumbling down the order. And again, a bit of a bizarre strategy from Haas there. And it seemed like, again, if we wear the tinfoil hats, they want to make it easier for themselves to make a decision about his future, and so we're just giving him a duff strategy so that he can't score any points for us. I'm sure that's not the case, but it's very easy to draw that conclusion when you're watching this and thinking about what's going on outside of the racing, and it's frustrating in a lot of ways because you don't want to think that, because you just want to be able to focus on the race and have some pure racing there. And Nick, we know he's a good driver, and the fact that he was able to get that car up into P8 with Magnussen down in P18, that should be the other way around. With all of Magnussen's experience, you do wonder how much it is the car, how much it is the driver, and if Nick can do that, and he's getting closer, like he's having been more consistently near a Q3 over the course of the season. It's curious how it could all go so south for him so quickly.
Yeah, it's just this. There's something that isn't adding up to it. I think potentially with Mick, the tinfoil hat theory is very tinfoily, but yeah, perhaps it's just Haas strategies. Perhaps they just can't do strategies.
I mean, they might just be you say Ferrari's getting new people in the background. Maybe they're shuffling them up to Haas.
Yeah, the ones that aren't working for Ferrari are going to Haas for some reason. But speaking of strategies that don't work, Lewis Hamilton is my spinner this week. It almost worked. It worked well, but yeah, it was the
safety car again that kind of screwed the pooch a bit there.
Yeah. He must have had war flashbacks to Abu Dhabi last year. Just sort of fortunate son starts playing in the background. He hears Huey helicopters and just sort of bad memories to Max Verstappen sort of pacing against him, just sort of waiting and on softs. You're thinking, oh no. And the fact that Max did what we saw George Russell do in France earlier this season, where he hangs back a long way under the safety car, so he's got a massive delta that he can make up just as everything goes green, puts his foot down, comes steaming up to Hamilton, has to lift, he gets that much of a good run, so he can just make sure he's a bit further back coming to the sort of start-finish line, and then as soon as he's across the start-finish line, even without DRS, he's blasted past the Mercedes, and you got to feel for Lewis in that instance, like thinking, oh, I should have been on the softs, but hey.
I think it was one of those, it was damned if you did, damned if you didn't. It was, after the second safety car came out, it was kind of, amusingly, Bottas was the one that ruined it for him. So, that's the way they could come, but I think it's good in some ways how frustrated they all were about it, because they could have won that race, and that's really great progress when you consider they were 1.8 seconds back from the top of the pack in Spa, last weekend. So I know it's a bit track dependent, but that's got to be encouraging.
Yeah, it does say a lot for Mercedes. When the circuit's right, it's good for them. I wouldn't be surprised to see them do quite all right in Singapore, with, again, a rather tight, demanding circuit, especially through that middle sector. So, one to keep an eye on still, certainly not one to count out of things. We'll move on to quickly Ellie-May's spinners. She's gone for Lewis Hamilton, which is probably for similar reasons to the ones I've used. Carlos Sainz, I can understand why. He had a decent qualifying position and then just sort of tumbled through the order, had that terrible pit stop.
Again, with Ricardo, though, for me, I'd blame Ferrari more than the driver there. Because there was, again, Carlos, I think, is coming round to the idea more that it's Ferrari that need to sort their shit out than Charles is at the moment. But it's amusing that 5-second penalty for Charles last week, 5-second penalty for Carlos this week, 5-second penalty for the both at Monza.
Ooh, please don't say that.
10 seconds for one of them?
No, that would ruin my weekend. Don't. That would ruin my weekend. Although I will say Carlos was battling a bit of damage from that early contact with Lewis. So I think Lewis is...
It was the most briefest of kisses, and it was not to a valuable bit of the car. It seems Lewis a bit of a cheap excuse to let Carlos off the hook there. Or the Ferrari.
Yeah. It's me being a Ferrari apologist, I'll admit. And then, Ellie-May gave us 3 spinners this week, actually. Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz and Sebastian Vettel. And Seb did have a pretty dire weekend of it. He was blue flagged out of the way at one point. And rather dramatically, actually, we saw him not blue flag his way out the way of the people coming through, which is quite exciting because it was just after a pit stop, so we saw them sort of duking it out through turns 3, 4, through the banking. It was quite exciting, really. It was Alonso versus... Was that Lewis as well?
Possibly, yes, I think so.
Yeah, so we had some brilliant driving there, and again, one of them just hindered with basically Seb moving out the way, but one of the other drivers moving to make the overtake and Seb accidentally sort of blocking them, so...
Does any of us make the case for, do we need blue flags in Formula 1, or do you just got to overtake them? It's your problem.
I would like to see a bit less blue flagging because it can really spice stuff up. And
sprint races, just don't get rid of blue flags. There you go.
Would you start lapping people in sprint races? You've got to really have some.
No, you just get rid of sprint races because you don't need them to encourage more racing. You just automatically have more in the Grand Prix itself because you're not blue flagging all the time. And you can have Latifi go wheel to wheel with Verstappen, and it doesn't really matter if it's the position or not because he can just be a Latifi about it.
Which goes great until Latifi starts wiping out race leaders as they come to lap him every time.
That is how we get Joe and Albon to win races. Or Latifi. That's how Latifi wins in Abu Dhabi this year.
God,
they tried it out like double points at Abu Dhabi in 2014, like Bernie tried, and we just do it for a one-off race. We just see how it goes, and that's how all my predictions for that race come true.
We'll leave that there and move on to Constructors and Drivers Countdown. Still in 10th place is Williams. P9 is home to Aston Martin, now 4 shy of P8's AlphaTauri. Haas are 5 points ahead, still in P7. Alfa Romeo continue their pointless streak since Canada in 6th. In 5th, McLaren break the 100-point mark by 1 point, while in 4th, Alpine open their gap to 24 points. In P3, Mercedes close the gap to the Scuderia, just 30 points between them now, and in P1 with 511 points. In a practically unassailable state, it's Red Bull. Future Alpine driver Nico Hulkenberg still sits in 21st, while in P20 it's Latifi. Stroll overtakes Albon for P18, relegating the tie driver to 19th. Joe Tsunoda, Mick, Pierre, Danny Rick, Seb, K-Mac and Bottas all stay as they were in 17th through 10th. In P9, Alonso closes the gap to his teammate, now with 7 points between the Alpine drivers. Norris extends his P7 lead over Ocon in P8, while in P6 Hamilton closes in on Sainz with just 17 points separating them. George Russell's P2 sees him again overtake the Spaniard with a gap of 13 points, making this the third position swap between them in as many races. After seceding P2 to Perez, a podium finish in Zandvoort has seen Leclerc draw level with the Mexican both on 201 points in second, though Charles injures it with more wins, while in P1 and now well into the 300 club, Max Verstappen looks untouchable. So Max Verstappen still leads the championship, as does Red Bull with the Constructors. But the question is, who is leading when it comes to predictions? Have we seen any changes in the standings? And the answer is yes. You've changed that note there. I'm fairly certain that, or I wrote that rather depressingly on Sunday. I must have written that myself.
I think that was you.
That was me that wrote this. So, for some reason in the third person, Jesse blew it this week, scoring sweet nothing for a Charles pole, Russell win, Charles P2, Norris P3. Leclerc didn't get the fastest lap and Max didn't DNF. Blast. This was you that wrote that. I did not.
I genuinely didn't.
This is Ellie-May messing with the script and then not being here to face the consequences of her actions.
She's not learning. We're going to have to ban her for another episode.
I got to respect her for that, but yeah, I did score absolutely nothing this week, which, coming after last week, Ellie-May and I were tied at the front of the grid.
That's unfortunate for you, isn't it?
Yeah, very unfortunate, especially while Thiemo scores a Verstappen triple, safely predicting his pole win and fastest lap. Meanwhile, Ellie-May makes it wilder, getting points for the Max win, George P2, Max fastest lap, and an Aston Martin finishing ahead of a McLaren, with actually both Aston Martin drivers finishing ahead of Danny Rick. We didn't give her double points for it, so she does score 4 points. Thiemo scores 3, I score 0. The net result is that the prediction standings change significantly. Ellie-May, 17 points, and that puts her on an average of 0.944 points per race, which means that she basically every week scores a point, which is quite impressive given the track record
she's
we have.
Ironically, given the driver she doesn't like the most, she's being very George Russell about it all.
Yeah. Thiemo, you're now in second place with 14 points.
I'm coming, baby.
I'm in third place with 13 points, and the guest
The guest that couldn't even score points this weekend because we didn't have one, so really lucky for you.
Yeah. Had we had a guest, especially had it been a guest of, say, Fraser Ford's calibre, scoring 3 points would have really seen me out of contention with this championship. But
Is Jesse Billington new Charles Leclerc?
Oh, don't say that. I don't want to be Jeopardy like that. Anyway, we'll move on. We'll move on from reviewing our predictions to reviewing our fantasy.
Hang on, how many
F1.
points does the guest have?
The guest in total has 11, so I'm 2 points clear of the guest, purely because we didn't have one for this week to predict predictions for. So that's default, which is Anyway, before I humiliate myself more on my own podcast, we'll move on to the Fantasy F1 League review. And, weirdly enough, Thiemo's done well here again, actually. So it was quite weird trying to write a script for this and praise Thiemo, so not entirely certain how to do this one. He came home and won this week's Fantasy F1 League, 20 points clear of James Baldwin's Rememory team. On the curbs, pretty much dominated. And like we've already mentioned, he had a Verstappen mega driver bagging 162 points with just one person. It wasn't a terrible week for my Jaffa Cake Racing team, who tied this week with last week's second place, Dan from my Masters, on 219 points in third. So we'll see if Thiemo can keep this pace up with his restructured team. He seems sceptical. Overall, Alex H still leads. Tejas closes the gap with 3 points between them, making a sort of second half of the season dash for the top there. My Jaffa Cakes are still in third place, 21 points shy of a higher podium step, with my BRT Yamaha team sitting in fourth. Thiemo, though, still sits P19 and P20. So
shows how far back I am when I can dominate a weekend and still making no difference to the standings whatsoever.
Yeah, P19, P20, but win this week. It's kind of like Alex Albon
winning. I was about to say very much Alex Albon points in Melbourne there. It's nice, but it's not going to change much.
It's no overall net change. Although, to be fair, he and Lance Stroll do keep swapping positions at the rate they're accumulating points. Like, I think it's he, Stroll and Zhou are in their own little battle for a position, which is quite exciting. We'll move on back to What the Hell Has Happened section with some non-race stuff, some interesting little facts and tidbits that we've sort of picked up as the weekend went over. So Max has now overtaken Niki Lauda for laps led in a career. I don't know how many it is off the top of my head. I should be able to pull it up quickly. Actually, let's see.
It's around 1,600 or something, I think.
I don't know, probably.
There was a graphic on Instagram, but I forget now. She's just Alonso is ahead of him by about at least 100 or 1,500 laps. It's one or the other. I know it's quite a big difference, but I can't quite pin down the exact number.
Yeah, but either way, Max has now overtaken Niki Lauda for laps led in a career, which is again quite impressive considering how young Verstappen is and how early this is in his career still, really. Lewis has yet to qualify higher than P4, which is one that's really quite surprising.
Not for lack of trying, Perez again in the way there this weekend. I think he could have broken that record this weekend if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, it really isn't for lack of trying, but it's just that case of you'd assume Hamilton would have got like a P3 quali at this point or something, but he just hasn't, which is impressive. And George breaks his streak of finishing P3, P4, or P5 this season with a P2, so congratulations.
Does continue a streak of finishing every race that he's probably finishes.
Every time he finishes a race,
he's in the top 5.
Gets to the end of it, he's in the top 5, and now he's found a new position within the top 5 to finish in P2. So
one more to unlock for George. It's going to be interesting to see if he can do that this season, and if so, where.
I reckon he will, and you'll hear about it in my predictions for the Singapore Grand Prix. Not that you really need to listen to that now, I've probably given it away. Anyway, that's pretty much all we've got time for in this week's episode, unless you've got anything else you want to chuck in.
No, I mean, just again, very difficult to be a Ferrari or a McLaren fan because they just keep buggering up everyone we like. It's not even a case of Haas last year when there's an obvious driver we all don't like. And Jesse mournfully getting his 2 hats out, which are, oh, look at that, Ferrari and McLaren. And, I mean, come back for our Monza preview episode, but I'm going to give you a free preview here, which I think is going to be a very sad weekend for Jesse.
Yeah, possibly also a damp weekend, but we'll get to that in due course.
It's going to rain on him next as well.
We'll get to that in about 5 minutes' time, recording-wise, or about 2 days edit-wise, but we'll see. Anyway, if that's all we've got time for this week, I've been Jesse Billington, and you can find me on Instagram and on Twitter and at Classic Car Weekly. So look for Jesse on Cars on the internet, or just on like your newspaper stand in your supermarkets and newsagents, because I'm there. I write things.
And I have been Thiemo Albers Daily, and I can be found over on Is It Fast, On the Curbs, the Nitro RX podcast, Paddock Soros, and of course Instagram. We
should probably also mention Ellie-May so she doesn't feel left out. She can be found on our Instagram page where she writes her key takeaways, which have made a return actually. There's some out for the Belgian Grand Prix. And she also runs our TikTok account, which reminds me I need to send her footage from Silverstone so she can make a TikTok, because TikToks. So there we go. That's all for our Dutch Grand Prix review. Join us in essentially 2 days' time for our preview of the Italian Grand Prix.
Yeah, there's a ton of pigeons around.
Roger. Never bring pigeons to a Formula 1 race.
Oh my god.